Hey guys, Lost here. Today we are doing something a little bit different. We're going to take a look at some alternate history involving World War I and Italy. So with a couple hours of research and using Hearts of Iron 4 as a base, I've put together what I think is a very possible scenario to what might have happened if Italy had joined the Central Powers during World War I. So in this video, I'm not going to talk about how the scenario came about, if it's even possible, or what circumstances might have led up to this. I'm just going to focus on what would have happened if Italy had honored its alliance, because frankly, that could almost be an entire video by itself. Now, I'm not saying that this scenario in the video would have happened, or even if it is the most possible scenario. I'm just saying that this is one scenario that could have played out had Italy joined the Central Powers. So I'm going to take a look at the time period where most historians agree the war officially really kicks off, and that is with the death of Franz Ferdinand. Countries gear up, they're ready to fight, knowing a war is just around the corner, and Italy is no exception, as Austria-Hungary is getting ready to issue its final ultimatum to Serbia, and Germany is preparing to launch its invasions into France. Italy sits between France and Austria-Hungary, knowing that it is going to have to invade France. More importantly, it's going to have to launch an invasion over the Alps. Now, at this time period, Italy only has about 1 million active soldiers, which might seem like a lot, but compared to the other countries, it is only equal to about a fifth of the other combined forces with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Not only is their military fairly small, but they are also undertrained and under-equipped, which meant in today's timeline, it made fighting in the mountains against the Austro-Hungarians virtually impossible, and they made almost no headway. Although yes, in this timeline they are now going to have to cross the Alps to the west, they are not nearly as long and dangerous as the Alps to their northeast with the Austrians. So Italy's plan before the war starts is simple. It will take its cavalry and launch itself over the Alps in a matter of days as fast as it can to secure the Rhone River on the other side. That way they will not get trapped in the mountains, because if they do, their inferior training and equipment will make them practically useless fighting and will result in massive casualties equal, if not greater, than the casualties they would face against the Alps to their northeast. Once they have their cavalry spearheading the advance, they will send massive waves of infantry over their borders to secure objectives on the other side of the river to help push France as far back as it can before they realize what's happening, and that way Germany can also get another head start on the Western Front. So with July rounding the corner, Austria-Hungary issues its ultimatum to Serbia. Italy now has to decide whether they want to honor or not honor the Triple Alliance, and you know how that plays out. So on August 1st, Germany officially declares war on Russia, and Italy, knowing that France is only days behind, has no other choice but to invade the Alps. Germany sees what Italy is doing and declares war on France as well, and implements the Schlieffen Plan. Now, this idea of launching massive waves of troops right away in the war was not exclusive to Italy. Practically every other country in the world at this time thought that this was going to be a short war, and they didn't really have any long-term goals in sight. As a result, all of the major countries did basically the same thing and launched massive attacks right away, meaning that some of the bloodiest days for France in the war were in 1914. With the involvement of Italy, the Western Front now almost doubles in size, meaning organization for France becomes extremely hectic in the first week of the war as it tries to defend from the advancing Germans and now a million extra Italian soldiers over its mountains. And with the surprising attack of the Italians and the disorganization of the first week of the war, the Italians managed to capture about 90% of their objectives, only a few hanging back, being hung up by a few French forces in the mountains. It takes roughly a week or so before France is finally able to put a large portion of its army down to the south and meet the Italians, though by September, even though the Italians have been mostly slow to a stop, the Germans have made crucial victories and actually managed to breach the French mainland. And even though the initial charges were a success, much of the original defenses along the Western Front are still controlled by France and is actually now surrounded by large portions of the German military. Portions of those defenses are going to last there for an outstanding 6 months by the French, while the Germans try and starve and bombard them out from there, and actually a large amount of German casualties are going to still be on that front. And though those trenches are still going to be fought over, the Germans have officially and cleanly breached the French mainland, meaning the stalemate that happens in today's timeline about 3 months after the war breaks out no longer happens, or at the very least does not happen on a large scale. It is now October of 1914, and rather than a stalemate, Germany now faces a long haul across the entirety of France, fighting almost every inch of the way. To the north, the Germans continue to gain ground, and for the rest of the war, never really stops. To the south, the Italians have mostly been put to a stop, except for a few isolated advances here and there. The spread-thin French army has essentially stopped the southern advance. At this point, I probably have a few people confused. How can Germany advance so successfully into the heart of France when in today's timeline, there was essentially a stalemate for 3.5 years before the Americans joined the war? At the end of 1914, the German Empire had about 3.8 million people in its standing army alone. With the combination of Great Britain and France, their total manpower was about 4.1 million. So as you can see, Germany alone in manpower can almost stand up to those two countries by itself, simply by diverting most of its forces to the Western Front, while simply holding off a little bit in the east while they deal with France. Though yes, manpower does not win a war, Germany at this time period had a largely superior ground force, which meant with the front line now about 5 times its original size, Germany had not quite as much trouble advancing as some people might think. So let us take a moment and see what is happening in the rest of the world. With the Germans focusing on the west far more than the east now, it seems clear that they can break the war in two fronts through the west instead of going through Russia. Let's shift our attention to the seas. At this time, Great Britain has a vastly superior navy and successfully puts on a naval blockade of Germany. While the north is fairly squared away in the seas towards favoring Great Britain, the Mediterranean actually starts to shift slightly more to the Central Powers. Now in terms of naval strength, the Italians sit just behind the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It has fewer capital ships, but it has a larger number of submarines and smaller screening ships, and as we know, submarines became extremely important during World War I. Even with the addition of the Italian Navy at the start of the war, it still seems like the Entente has naval supremacy. However, much like on land, with the extra space France and Great Britain now have to defend, they begin to wear down much sooner, and we haven't even invited the Ottomans into the mix yet. Down in Africa, the Italians continue to try and spread the Entente forces thin by holding their places along the northern shores. Well, hello, guess who's here? It's time for the Ottomans. With sporadic victories by the Central Powers down in the south, by February, the Ottomans decided to take their sweet time in joining the war, and on February 1st, the Ottoman Empire joins the war on the Central Powers. So the Central Power war machine is now going full steam ahead. The Ottomans immediately put their navy down in the Mediterranean, and after months of losses by the Central Navies, through the combined efforts of all 4 countries, they are now able to hold their own against the superior Entente navies. With the Ottoman Empire joining, the land game changes now as well. Through the combination of Ottoman and Italian forces, the battles throughout Africa are largely victorious on the side of the Central Powers. Though this alliance might not seem very realistic due to the previous wars just a few years before, I feel like some reparations by Italy through Germany could get the Ottomans to join the war on the side of the Central Powers and help reclaim some lost land. Great Britain and France continue to be spread even more thin than they already are. Back in the heartland of Europe, Italy has lost about 2/3 of the soldiers that it would have lost had it invaded the Austro-Hungarian Empire in today's timeline. Though the Italians have sustained casualties and their advance is slow going, the Germans have not stopped. With them advancing straight through the heart of France, the threat of Paris falling to the Germans now becomes very real. Also, with the addition of still about 800,000 Italian soldiers on the front, Germany is able to sacrifice a few 100,000 men and send them to the east to get a head start on the spring offensives into Russia. By April of 1915, Paris has fallen between French and German hands multiple times over the past few weeks. However, it finally falls to the Germans, and casualties are high. For the French, they are high, but for Germany, they are even higher. I'd like to give you more precise numbers on casualties, but with this really being historical fiction, the best I can do is a good estimate on what they could be. By around May or the beginning of summer, France has been overrun by Italian and German forces, with France sustaining over 1 million military casualties and Germany about the same. In the span of 10 months, Germany has successfully invaded and conquered all of France. With the quote, war on two fronts over, Germany is now able to focus all of its attention on the largely untouched Eastern Front. And Italy, on the other hand, sends most of its forces down to Africa, so with the help of the Ottoman Empire, they begin to take out the French and British colonial forces. It doesn't take long for the Austrians and the Germans to put millions of soldiers on the Eastern Front, pushing deeper and deeper into Russian territory. With the combination of such large forces, including the Ottomans, the Central Powers are able to push deeper into Russia than they had ever hoped for in the history timeline we know today. So by the end of summer of 1915, Russian forces have been almost completely driven back, and due to turbulent war times, the Communist Revolution begins a few years early. So at this point in the timeline, you could probably argue that the Communist Revolution never actually takes place, but I'd like to think that through the combination of all of the Central Powers, they could invade Russia, win, dominate them, and Russia would once again be out of the war. With 2 out of the 3 members of the Triple Entente now officially out of the war, all of the attention turns to Great Britain and its protectorates and colonies. It seems as though Great Britain only has a matter of time before it falls beneath the Central Powers. However, for the time being, its vast navy prevents an all-out naval invasion of the islands. Notice how I said for the time being. With the Central Powers controlling vast portions of Africa, all of the resources of France, and at least some of the resources of Russia, it won't be long before they will be able to invade Great Britain. Since an all-out naval invasion of either side would be vastly detrimental and thousands if not millions of casualties will be lost, it doesn't happen. With the end of 1915 coming around and it being winter, the next option for Germany to be able to invade Great Britain would be in the summer of 1916. Well, that never happens either, because the Treaty of Tokyo, or if not some other place, is signed. In this treaty, the war officially ends and the exact guidelines of what unfolds after is somewhat hazy, but there are a few things I can almost say for certain. Germany would likely follow the Septemberg program, which outlined at the beginning of the war but never got to implement because of the stalemate and because the war went so long. I will put a link in the description if you want to read about it, but I will sum it up for you right here. Germany will annex Belgium, but most likely just make it a vassal state. It will puppet the whole entirety of France while setting up more puppet states along its eastern border with Russia while seizing its resources. It will also vastly expand its colonial empire into Africa, seizing resources there. The other countries are slightly more vague. The Austro-Hungarian Empire will seize parts of the Balkans, while the Ottoman Empire will dive more into Africa, seizing more territory from France and Great Britain. Italy is kind of the wild card. You could not really say for certain what its goals would be after the war, but I'd imagine it would take more colonial territory in Africa like the other European powers did. It's also a possibility that some of Great Britain's protectorates would be up for grabs for the other European powers, including Italy. Now, like I said, this is kind of just made up, and I kind of have to go off of my intuition since there's nothing really written down in stone. Since this video has been quite long, I think it's time that I kind of wrap everything up, because realistically, when Italy had joined the war on the Entente side, it barely made a dent in the Austro-Hungarians. How did it influence the war in the Central Powers so much? If anything, that just proves how strong the Central Powers already were to begin with. Due to the initial extra success of the first attacks of the first few weeks of the war, Germany managed to invade France and prevent the war of stalemate from happening. Thus, they could extort their full mass of military and win their war throughout Europe. So even though the Italian military was pretty small, pretty weak, and didn't do a whole lot, it helped strategically for the larger countries to advance their goals. I'm sorry this video lasts so long. We're getting to the end here. I want to thank you guys for watching. Let me know if this is of any interest to you at all, and maybe I can do another one of a different alternate history. Hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys later.